Hi, I'm Jeremy Morgan. Welcome to the Claude Code course. Imagine coding with an AI assistant that can summarize, audit, and even help design your entire project in seconds. Since its launch, Claude has helped thousands of developers ship faster and more securely, with over 80% reporting fewer bugs and more efficient code reviews. Companies across the globe are now integrating Claude Code into their workflows, with teams cutting onboarding times in half and reducing security vulnerabilities thanks to automated audits. In this course, you'll unlock the same cutting-edge capabilities, starting from setting up your environment, launching your first session, and diving into codebase analysis with ease. Whether you're looking to speed up development, boost security, or simply make software engineering more enjoyable, you're in the right place. Let's get started and see how Claude Code can revolutionize your workflow. In getting started, we'll build a project from scratch with Claude, easily scaffolding the codebase, preparing for public release, and adding solid unit tests. You'll also learn to delegate tasks for autonomous completion and manage environments for consistency and security. Hands-on labs throughout show how Claude streamlines setup and prepares you for real-world challenges fast. With your project running, you'll learn to collaborate efficiently with Claude day to day. We'll cover managing extended sessions, crafting effective prompts, and navigating multi-file projects. Claude helps you master code reviews, spot security issues early, and integrate external APIs. Each module focuses on practical use so you can fully leverage Claude in your workflow. In the next section, you'll learn how Claude acts as your smart code reviewer. Here you'll use it for detailed project analysis, architecture evaluation, and checking design patterns and solid principles. You'll learn to review resilience, error handling, and code quality, spot duplication, and boost test coverage, giving you actionable code reviews to help improve your software. Security matters, and Claude makes auditing straightforward. In this section, you'll perform scans, review authentication and authorization, and check input validation, databases, and APIs. Claude assists in reviewing cookie security, file handling, and business logic, then helps you create audit reports so you can deliver robust, secure software. In advanced features, unlock Claude's full potential. Work with Claude agents on autonomous tasks, explore test-driven development, and tackle database design and migrations. Learn to automate CLI tools, create Kubernetes clusters, and set up CI/CD pipelines, helping you build scalable, professional-grade projects with ease. At KodeKloud, we believe in the power of community. Community is at the heart of our learning experience. So join our vibrant forums where you can connect with fellow learners, ask questions, and share your journey. Together, we'll build a supportive space to grow and succeed. So let's embark on this journey and let's delve deep into the world of Claude Code together. Okay, now here's the prerequisites and how to get started with Claude Code. Claude Code is an NPM application at its core. So if you're familiar with NPM, then this part is super easy. If not, you'll need to have Node.js 18 or newer. So what I do, I'm on a Mac here, so I'll just do brew install node. And it looks like we are at Node 24.4.1, already installed and up to date. Great. So it requires Node.js 18 or newer. So we're good there. And the way to install Node is different on each operating system. Generally on Mac, you can download the binary installer, or you can do brew install node. I use Homebrew, so it manages all those packages. If you're on Linux, you can do sudo apt-get install node, something like that. In Windows, you can download the installer, but you just want to make sure that you have Node.js 18 or newer. And that's really all the requirements for this. I mean, aside from a Claude account. Okay, so we know that Claude Code is an NPM app, and if you're not familiar with NPM, that's fine. You don't need to know a lot about it to use Claude Code. What you'll need to type in to install it is npm install-g Anthropic-AI Claude-Code. Now, what is the -g? Well, that means we're installing it globally. So if you install a Node.js without that -g, it will install Claude Code into your project. So whatever folder you're in, whether it's a Git repo or an NPM app or whatever, it'll install Claude Code within that application. We want to run this on any application, anywhere on our hard drive, basically. So we're going to install this globally. And that's what the /g is for global. So let's type that in. And it'll go through and it says added 12 packages. So now Claude Code is installed on our machine. Okay, so what do we do now? How do we run Claude Code? Well, it's pretty easy. Let's type in Claude. Now it says, welcome to Claude Code. And here's the first startup screen that you'll see the very first time you start up Claude Code on your machine. And it says, let's choose the text style looks best with your terminal. Dark mode, light mode. You can do dark mode, colorblind friendly, etc. I tend to do just regular old dark mode. ANSI colors are kind of nice too. Let's do that. Now check this out. It says, welcome to Claude Code. Claude Code can now be used with your Claude subscription or build based on API usage through your console account. So here there's two different ways. So if you have a pro account, which is $20 a month, or the $100 a month max account, this is basically a predictable pricing model. So you'll be able to use this without being billed too much. Or you can just do an Anthropic console account with API usage billing. If you're only going to use this to try it out or whatever, this can be a little bit cheaper, but I'm already using a Claude account with a subscription. I'm doing a Claude Pro account, so I'm just going to select that. And it says, using your browser to sign in. Now here's something cool. If it says browser didn't open, use this URL to sign in. Right? So you can just take this URL, drop it in. Now, where this is handy, the reason I'm bringing this up is because if you were running WSL in Windows, sometimes it does not pop up that browser automatically. That's one thing that I've noticed. Now, on my Mac, it did just pop up a browser for me. But when you're in Windows with WSL, it won't pop up that browser. Or if you are SSH'd into a server, so you can run Claude Code anywhere, right? So if you have a server, you're SSHing into a Linux server somewhere out on AWS or whatever, it's not going to have a browser installed on it, so you won't be able to do that. But if you take this URL here, you can go into your browser and give it access. So like I said, mine did open up a browser for me on this machine, and it says Claude Code would like to connect to your Claude chat account, access your Anthropic profile information, contribute to your Claude subscription usage, etc. So I'll go ahead and authorize that. Now it says authentication code. Paste this into Claude Code. So I'll click copy code. Here we go. It's asking for this code. Boom. We'll put this in. And it says login successful. Press enter to continue. Next, you'll see some security notes. Now here it says Claude can make mistakes. You should always review the responses, etc. These are just basic standard boilerplate warnings. All right, so let's do a real life example here. So I'm going to use one of my favorite websites, mockaroo.com. And what this does is it generates mock data for testing, software development, stuff like that. It's a really cool site. It's amazing. So we'll hit generate data. And I'm going to download this and we'll call it members.csv and just download it into my awesome project. And now back at the Claude Code prompt, I'm going to say, create a Python file that reads members.csv and displays first and last names. Now it's going to go through and of course it's going to look and see if it can find that file, and it's going to create a Python file to read that and display first and last names. Here we go. Here's our code. Now, when you're adjusting the theme or the colors, things like that, it's mostly for this, for the code highlighting. So I can see this, and we can see we have read members py, import CSV. We have a read members function here that opens up members CSV, read only. It takes first name and last name, and it looks like it will print that out. And of course, if it doesn't find the file, it throws an error. If there's any other kind of exception, it captures it there. This is some good code, right? This is good code for reading a CSV file. Now, a lot of times they'll use pandas or something like that when things are complex, but for this simple task, this is a very good code generation. So I'm going to say, do you want to create read members? Yes. There we go. Now, what can we do from here? Well, we can leave this prompt open, right? This thing goes, we can go back to Visual Studio Code. And here's one of the good things. Here's my awesome project right here. I've got that open. Now I can exit this. And in Visual Studio Code, I can go to the terminal here, create a new terminal, and type in Claude here. And here we go. We can see that we have Claude Code running in the terminal. So in here, we can do terminal setup. We can change some settings, etc. I'll press enter. And there we go. That way you don't have to have that window open all the time. So you saw that I had a terminal window open and I was running Claude Code and doing things like that. But now I'm sitting here in my awesome project and looking at this new code that was created here by Claude, looking at my member CSV. So for me, it's a little bit easier to just run Claude Code within this terminal. And then I can just go here and just create a new terminal, bash terminal or whatever else. And we can do that. So I can say, create a virtual environment, we'll activate it, and I can say Python, read members py, and there we go. Within seconds, Claude Code created this file that reads off the first and last names from that CSV file. So I just wanted to show how to set up the prerequisites, how to install Claude Code the first time, and this is on a Mac for this demonstration. However, it can be on Windows or Linux, basically the same. So let's start digging into this and doing a little bit more advanced stuff. But this is how easy and quick it is to get set up with Claude Code and get rolling right off the bat. All right, let's take a little deeper look at this and setting up your first session. Now here we have some tips for getting started. Run /init to create a Claude MD file with instructions for Claude. And we're going to dive into that and see what that means. Use Claude to help with file analysis, editing, bash commands, and Git. Be as specific as you would with another engineer for best results. Now this is probably the most important tip right here. Be as specific as you would with another engineer. So pretend like Claude Code is an assistant, because that's exactly what it is. But it's just another developer sitting next to you who happens to know a lot that you can discuss things with. You can say run terminal setup to set up terminal integration. So the first thing I want to do is do init. Now here, this is going to create a new Claude MD file. And you can see here, it's going to go through several steps here. It's going to analyze things. It's going to find out what kind of project it is. Here it's looking for package JSON, which we don't have. Project toml. See, all we've done is created a Python file and a CSV. So it is going to have to kind of figure out how this works. Now, let's take a look and see what it created for the Claude MD. Claude MD, this file provides guidance to Claude Code when working with code in this repository. So this is a simple Python project that processes member data from a CSV file. Project consists of, and that has everything that we have, uses Python 3.12 with a virtual environment. Here's how to activate it. Here's how to run the main script. Here's how to deactivate it, etc. Now, it shows the code architecture here. Single-purpose script. Code contains one main Python file that handles CSV reading and processing. Talks a little bit about the error handling, right? So the script includes basic error handling. Flexible CSV parsing provides both snake case and title case column headers for names. Works with a large CSV data set, appears to contain thousands of member records, and has some key implementation details. So it says, do you want to make this edit? I'm going to say yes. So we're going to edit that. Now, what if I want to turn this into a real application, right? Now we can see we've gone back here, and if we do the front slash, there's a whole bunch of different stuff here, and we're going to take a look at that in this course for sure. But you can see here, we have a config panel, we have a doctor, which diagnoses and verifies your Claude Code installation, manage agent configurations, etc. Now, one thing I'm going to do, I'm going to talk to this like a real engineer, right? I'm going to say, how do I make this a real application that I can publish to GitHub? Now, what's a real application? That's really fuzzy, really indeterminate definition. But I'll
I'll double down a little bit and explain it. Other applications, and I would like to provide as much information to the developer using it as possible. Now we've kicked that off. Let's see what it says. Basically, I'm just saying, how do I make this something that I'm not afraid to put on GitHub and be embarrassed about? Okay, now open this up just a little bit more so we can take a look at it. Here, we'll scroll all the way up. We've created Claude. It says, I'll help you transform this into a proper Python package that can be published and easily integrated into other applications. Let me create a comprehensive structure with all the necessary files. Here's what it wants to do. And what it does is Claude Code will create a set of to-dos and it'll walk through these. So create proper Python package structure. We're going to add a setup PY or a project toml for packaging, a comprehensive README, a requirements.txt, example usage and documentation, proper handling and logging, create unit tests, add GitHub workflows for CI/CD, and create contributing guidelines, and update CloudMD with the new structure. Do I want to proceed? Yeah. Now, granted, this isn't a super useful program. It's not really worth putting on GitHub because it has just this very narrow use. But it's a good idea just to kind of see how these things can kind of evolve and stuff. Like if you're building some kind of project, you can have Claude Code say, hey, I want to make this so that other folks can use it. And, how do I do that? We have an init PY, and we're looking here. This is going to be an init PY that's going to have some classes to it, showing the errors that it uses. And basically, we're doing a lot of like documentation and other things that are kind of tightening up we've got exceptions PY that's tightening up the script a little bit. And it's making it a little bit more production ready than it is now. Okay, we'll notice here that it is creating a reader PY, and it's a data class with some member data here, and then a member reader that reads that data. And it's putting this into a set of classes and asking me, do you want to do this? Yeah, let's do this. So now it's putting it into a set of classes. Why does that matter? Well, it's good for expandability, right? If we want to just have this be a simple Python script that you run to read the first and last name of members, it's great. But if you want to make this into a real application or make it into a module to put into a real application, you're going to want to do a lot more. Some of the things like classes, you want to do that for organization purposes, for ease of upgrading and testing. We can see here it's creating a PyProject toml. And this is basically saying, here's what it requires. Here's the name, the version. You can put my name in there, a Python package for reading and processing member data. And it just goes through all of this information to make this a real Python project. And here's the command line interface for the CSV member reader. We'll let it go through and we can see that things are getting definitely more complex. However, it's also becoming more like a real production application. Okay, now we've got a README file here. We would see robust Python package for editing, etc. And we've got a nice README file. And we have edits to requirement.txt, which right now doesn't really contain anything, but we'll see how it goes later on. Here's our development dependencies, which I'm not sure where it found those dependencies because I don't think I need any of those. But next is going to be creating example usage and documentation. This is basic usage PY for basic usage example. Here's CLI examples. So in here, we'll have a CLI usage example where it's going to say, here's how to use it with the CLI. CSV member reader, members.csv, show total member count, verbose output with logging, using different encoding, etc. And now it wants to chmod this shell script so that we can run it. So I'm going to say yes. And now it's going to create a test package. It says, do you want to make this edit to test reader PY? And this is going to be testing our application. And here I'm going to say yes, and don't ask again, because we're just going to let it go through and build all the tests and do all the things for our awesome project. And here, do you want to make this directory? Yes. Okay. Now we can see here the next steps to publish. We can set up a development environment, which we've already done, but gives us instructions to do that again. Test everything works with PyTest. CSV members count, create GitHub repository, configure for publishing, GitHub URLs, etc. The package can now be easily installed by others with pip install CSV member reader and used as both a library and CLI tool. Well, let's see. Let's find out. So we'll go here back to our bash, and I'm going to go to CSV member reader and take a look at this. We'll go to tests, Python test CLI, and we don't have PyTest installed. So we'll do that, and we should actually have a requirements text in here somewhere. And that requirements text does not have PyTest. Just as a note. We also don't have CSV member reader. So we're going to go back here. CloudMD. We have our accident. We're going to do Python read members py. We can see that that works. And for this, we can do PyTest member reader. We want that to be HTML. So we can see here that these commands may not be 100% accurate for the PyTest. Try running it within here. And we're still getting unrecognized documents. So that's something to note, that there could be some hallucinations in here. So we can do PyTest. And one of the things we can do is we'll deactivate it. And we will say, let's see, here, and we'll follow the instructions exactly to make sure that we are not doing something wrong. It does need to be pip3 because I'm on a Mac. We're going to type in pre-commit install. It failed, it is installed, or you're going to get repository directory. So some of this stuff here, I think we could remove out of here. Because as I go through the instructions, I can see some things that don't exactly work. One of them here, we can say, and I don't see any dev directory where this is created. See where it says pip install -e, this is unfamiliar to me, so I'm not really sure why it suggested that and how that works. But I also don't see that environment and where it was created. So it does look like a bit of a mystery. So I would take this out. Run tests. Take this out. Until we can find out the stuff that works and the stuff that doesn't. All right, we have code quality tests. And we type in black here, and it goes through all of these and says, all done, 10 files reformatted. So that one's good. What about flake 8 for flaky tests? See here, flake 8 says a bunch of these, the line is too long. And finally, we're going to do MyPy. There we go. And we do have an import issue. So in here, if we do mypi, or mypi dot, and it is not seeing our netpy. So mypi appears to not be working. So that part isn't working quite as well either. So basically, the point I'm trying to make here is we want to go through these and really go through your Claude MD, go through your README, and make sure that things are accurate and they are set up the way they're supposed to be set up. Things like that, just to kind of double check your Claude installation. But I wanted to show some of the first session type things that you'll do in the first time you work with a new product. So previously we did the prerequisites and the install. This is how you get set up and start your first session and kind of build out, like we built out this huge project here from a single Python script with a CSV. So this is one of those things where you can use Claude as an agent to kind of get you started, to get all that not so fun stuff out of the way. Things like building tests, building README files, and things like that. Now there's another cool thing you can do with Claude Code, which is analyzing code bases. So I wanted to find a big giant code base that I have in my personal collection. One of them is Retro Racer, which is a combination of a JavaScript, Node.js, 3JS video game with a Go backend. And I have a Go API with a SQLite database for the backend for this. And so I just want to ask a few questions about this repository. So I'll type in Claude, my terminal. It says Claude Code may read files in the folder, might execute files. Now this is something that is valid to ask for this because there's a Go application in here. So this thing might execute Go apps, but I'm cool with it because it's mine. You can see here we can run init. You can use Claude to help with file analysis, editing, bash commands, and git. You can run terminal setup. So we never did do terminal setup in the last one. So let's do that now. The terminal setup. And you can see here, we're going to use VS Code terminal shift enter key binding. And so now Claude Code knows that it lives within Visual Studio Code, and I can change those key bindings by editing this file here. Now, what can we do here? Now we have Claude in here. We can say something like, give me a high-level overview of this code base. Like, just tell me what the heck this is that we're looking at here. Okay, and now we've got a good high-level overview. So let's take a look at it. Retro Racer, high-level overview. It's a multiplayer racing game with a retro aesthetic built with modern web technologies and a Go backend. The front end, JavaScript-based web client using 3JS for 3D graphics. The back end is a Go server with WebSocket support for real-time multiplayer gameplay. The build system is Vite for development and bundling. Here it shows our key components. Here's our front end, entry point, our main logic, etc. And then our back end, the server entry point, server and client management, core game logics, physics, etc. And it shows here our technology stack. And this is all completely accurate. This code base appears to be a complete racing game implementation with real-time multiplayer capabilities, physics simulation, and a 3D graphics rendering. That's awesome. So one of the things I can do is say, explain the main architecture of the Go backend app. And now this is going to go through and it's going to take a look at the Go backend and just kind of explain how it works. And here we go. Key architectural patterns. Event-driven hub model in hub.go. It uses Go channels for non-blocking communication, 60 Hz game tick for real-time updates, separate channels for registration, input, and broadcasting. Concurrent player management, mutex protected shared state, Go routines for each client's read-write operations, channel-based player lifecycle management. We have physics integration. We have message protocol. The architecture supports up to 8 concurrent players per hub with real-time physics simulation running at 60 frames a second using WebSocket connections for low latency multiplayer gameplay. So this is a really good overall kind of look at this. Now, one of the things we can do here is say, find the files that handle database access. And now you can see it's searching through the code. And let's take a look at what it says. It says, based on my analysis of the RetroEraser codebase, there are no database access files. It uses in-memory storage only, which is correct because the latest iteration of this actually doesn't use a backend database. So it says no database dependencies, no imports from any Go files, no SQL database related code, no persistence layer. Everything is stored in memory via Go structs, which is correct. When you start up a multiplayer server and shut it back down, everything is lost. However, there is RetroEraser server log. So here's another cool thing we can do. What are the most recent errors found in RetroEraser server log? And we can just ask, hey, what kind of errors have we had for this thing recently? And we can look here and it says key issues found. Player client map synchronization problem, which that is a problem with this. Players are being removed from the player's map immediately after joining, indicates a race condition between client registration and player tracking. Client count discrepancy, broadcasted updated players to list to 0 clients, shows 0 clients, but players are joining successfully. Phantom heartbeat messages, WebSocket connection errors. It's showing us a whole bunch of this stuff. And sometimes you can be very direct with this and just say, fix this. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Or you can just copy this, go down here and say, suggest some ways to fix. And I could just say item number 1, but we're just kind of reminding Claude Code which one we're talking about and suggest some ways to fix this. And it comes back with a recommended approach. So it takes a look at all the code here and says, hey, why don't you do all of these things? All right, so add a registration state flag, which is something I actually did before that didn't work out great, but I haven't tried this with Claude Code. Move player map date updates inside the hub's main event loop, etc. So it says, I suggest implementing solution number 4, single source of truth, combined with solution number 1 because it eliminates synchronization complexity, reduces race conditions, maintains clear ownership of player state, etc. So I can say, implement solution number 4 and solution number 1 as you suggested. And now it's going to start asking me one by one as it modifies files. Do you want me to make this edit to client go? Yeah. And we can see here, these are the changes that it wants to make. And it'll go through quite a few of these, I imagine, with this particular fix. And I can say, yeah, and don't ask again in this section. Now we'll work on the hub struct. Okay, now it's come back to ask me a question again. And now it wants to build the Go backend and check for compilation errors. So I'm going to say yes. And it looks like we did have some compilation errors, which Claude Code's going to catch and attempt to fix. Okay, now it's going to try to build it again. Great, the compilation is successful. Now let me update the client registration logic to use atomic registration and mark the client as complete. So this is how easy it is to use Claude Code with a giant, and I say giant because this is a fairly large project, and it basically will go in and take a look at all of your code files and make suggestions and things like that. And we have build successful. Do I want to proceed? And now it's going to mark the final to-do as complete. So I can check this out, see if we have any errors or anything. But I just kind of wanted to show how to work with existing code bases with Claude Code and how easy it is. And it's very smart. It does a great job of looking at your entire code base and figuring out how it works, what it needs. And then, of course, in this case, I said, hey, look at my logs and tell me what's wrong. And it went through those logs, told me what was wrong, and then now it's starting to do fixes. So this is an indispensable tool for things like this. And this is pretty cool. Okay, now I'm including this demo because I had some problems setting up machines on EC2 machines to do demos. this is a problem that you may run into. So if you have a typical Ubuntu machine, EC2 or other platforms, you may run into this problem. So we'll type in sudo apt update, right? And we'll update the machine. Okay, and it shows here that we have some packages that could probably be upgradable, right? So we'll do sudo apt upgrade and upgrade the system. And this is part of the install instructions for Claude. Okay, awesome. So we've got this thing upgraded, right? Now, if we try to do as the Claude instructions say and do sudo apt install Node.js npm, right? Because we need that to install Claude. It's going to go through and say, hey, do you want us to install all this stuff? And we say, yeah, sure, that'd be great. Okay, now we're upgraded. We have npm, all that. And we'll copy this directly from the Claude Code instructions, where it says npm install -g for global Anthropic AI Claude Code, right? And it specifically says on the Anthropic site, do not use sudo npm install g because it can lead to permission issues. So we're going to trust them that we shouldn't do that. And we're going to run it as they say. And this is what we get. We get a permission denied. Here, it doesn't allow us to make user local lib node modules, right? This operation was rejected by your operating system. It's likely you don't have the permissions, which is fine. So there's a couple different ways we can approach this. We can change the permissions for node modules to allow the Ubuntu user to own user local lib node modules. Now, why is that a problem? Because any other users on the system aren't going to be able to access it. So we have a choice here. We can either run sudo npm install -g, which, by the way, Anthropic, like I said, tells us specifically not to do this. So we could run that, so we can run it, or we can change it to be user local lib node modules. Either way, it's probably not the best idea. So how do we solve this? Well, the way that I solved it was by installing this manually, and I'll show you. Now, one of the things that I should point out here is when you're creating an instance, like here I'm doing it on Lightsail, right? We want to make sure that we're selecting this one. This has 4 gig of memory, 2 CPUs, 80 gig of storage. Why is that important? Because it says right here, system requirements, we need operating systems of these. We need 4 gigs of RAM in order to run Claude Code effectively. So I just wanted to make sure and put that in here that we want to select an operating system that meets the requirements and 4 gigs of RAM or more. Okay, so we're back at our machine here and we've installed npm and Node.js and stuff like that, and we couldn't get it to work. And here's how we can install it manually using the native installer. So here we're going to do sudo apt install -y, curl, and git. Now git should already be installed, and it looks like curl already is too, but it's something you want to do just in case. And then we're going to install Claude Code from the binary. And the way we do that is do curl-f ssl https:/claude.ai install.sh and pipe that into bash. Now you can look at install.sh and examine it to see if that's something you want to run, or you can just trust them and pipe it into bash like this. And here we can see it is going to install it manually. And it says Claude Code successfully installed, which is great. So we'll do Claude help. And it's not found, which is fine. We can exit out of it and log back in. Okay, we'll type in Claude help. And now we can see that Claude is installed. So by the time you watch this video, this might be fixed. But this is just something that I noticed when I was going on to EC2 servers, is that I could not do a standard npm install -g of Claude like you would on other machines. And I went to another Ubuntu server on another service and kind of found the same thing. So I just wanted to show this is what I had to do. I had to go look it up and see And so this is how you install it manually with that curl command that I gave you, and then it'll work just fine. And like I said, they might get this fixed by the time you take this course, and I hope so, but this is always an option to do. We're going to start our new project with Claude Code. Now I want to start something from fresh that we can work with, we can build tests for, documentation, etc. And it's actually really fast and easy. We really don't need to know a ton about code in order to create really cool applications. However, I am going to use my previous knowledge of software development because I know exactly what I want this project to look like. Now we're going to build a METAR reader. What's a METAR? Well, it's a format for reporting weather information to pilots. So each airport puts out this METAR weather report, and it's mostly used by pilots, sometimes used by weather people, folks like that, but it just kind of assists with weather forecasting. And raw METAR is highly standardized, as it says here, through the International Civil Aviation Organization. So that means I should be able to build a tool that goes to each individual airport, whatever airport we select, and brings up this information in a human readable format. Now, why is that important? Because this is what a METAR looks like. It's a little cryptic, right? We can look at the KJFK and figure out maybe that's KJFK as in JFK Airport. This might be a time, maybe, or a date. We have 16008 KT. Who knows what that might be? 10 SM, etc. So this stuff, now pilots can look at this and tell you exactly what it is. They can say, winds 15 miles to the south, 80% humidity, and it's a 70-degree day or whatever. But we, as regular folks, don't know how to interpret this, and that's exactly what our METAR reader is going to do. We're going to make it so we can type in KJFK, or in my case, here's the airport that's right down the road from me, KHIO, and we'll be able to see some weather information for that area, and it'll be in a nice, readable, clean format. Now, as I said before, I am going to use my previous software development knowledge to dictate what I want. So if I just go in here and type in, build me an app that does this, well, it could be an Electron app. It could be a Qt++ app. It could be anything, a web app. Who knows? And I do want this to be a web app. And I want this to be a Flask application because I really like Flask and I have some other Flask stuff. So what we're going to do is we're going to fire up Claude. Now I have this folder created here. It's already a Git repository. And we've seen this a couple of times now where Claude may read files in the folder, etc. Now here we have some tips for getting started, right? We already know we can set up terminal integration. We can create a Claude MD, but let's just get started with this. So what are some of the things that we need to know? Well, we need to know what the app is, what it's going to do, what it will be built with, and what we expect to be a criteria of success. With just those things, Claude can build us an application. So I'm going to say, create a Flask web application. This application will be a METAR reader. Now I'm making an assumption here. And this is one of the things that I've talked about in all of the courses that I do when I build these courses with LLM tools, is you have to make assumptions of what the LLM knows or explain everything. I'm going to assume it knows what a METAR is. And I'm going to give an example, so it should be able to figure that out. But I'm going to say, create a Flask web application. This application will be a METAR reader. The user can type in an airport code, and then the application will fetch the METAR reading from that airport and decode it. I'm going to say METAR is a standardized weather report. So I am going to put in some context there and do a little explaining just in case. METAR is a standardized weather report. It is somewhat cryptic, so I would like to convert it into plain English that people can understand. For instance, clear day, 70 degrees, wind. So I'm basically saying this is what it looks like for success. And I'll double down on that a little bit. Type in an airport code and receive a friendly, readable weather report from it. Here is the service I will use. When you change the airport code, it outputs the corresponding METAR. And so I'm going to go back to up here and copy this. And now I should be ready to go. And it might have some questions for me, but I think it will create an application pretty close to this just based on our very specific prompt. And we can see it's setting up the to-dos, right? So as we've talked about before, Claude Code sets up a to-do list and it brings out all these to-dos. This is a good thing for you to look at and say, oh, wait, that's not right. That doesn't look good. And at that point, you can interrupt Claude Code and say, no, I didn't ask for that, or I didn't want that, or whatever. But now it's going through the to-dos. Okay, and we can see here, we have our first edit request. And it's trying to create a Flask import here. It says METAR decoder. And here's our wind directions, right? So north, northeast, etc. Get wind direction. We got decode visibility. So if the visibility is 10 SM, that means visible for 10 square miles, or it ends with square miles, and that must mean there's some visibility. Otherwise, visibility not reported. And if you can't tell, I can tell what some of these codes are. I'm a little bit familiar with them, but here's another one. Decode cloud types, clear skies, CLR, a lot of what you see in the summertime. SKC is another one, sky clear. Few clouds, scattered clouds, broken clouds, or overcast. We can see here, decode weather phenomena, rain, snow, drizzle, fog, mist, thunderstorm, showers. So all of these are assumptions that Claude Code is making based on its knowledge of what a METAR is, because these are all METAR codes. Intensity, etc. All of these are valid METAR codes. So I'm just going to say, okay, this looks good. It's calling what I want it to call. So I'll say yes. And now I've noticed it comes up with a bunch of different words down here. Cerebrating, I'm not really sure. Now it says, I want to make a directory named templates. So yeah, let's create some templates directory here. And here, do you want to make this edit to index HTML? So here's METAR weather reader, enter an airport code to get a friendly weather report. Yeah, sure. I'll say yes. And you can tell the to-dos are starting to get checked off here. Now we have a create results display template. And this is going to be the display with the raw METAR included. So I'm going to say, yeah, that sounds good. And it wants to create a static directory for CSS files. Sure. Elucidating, I think that's what it says there. Okay, and we have a style sheet. I'm just going to say yes. It says test the application with various airport codes. And then finally, requirements.txt. Yes. Now it's reticulating again. And right here, it's creating a Python virtual environment, installing requirements.txt. I'll just select yes. And it says start Flask application and background to test. Yes. And we can say command timed out. So it tried to start it up and it already got an error. So now it's going to be flibbertigibbiting. Development server. Okay. And it says this app will be available at localhost 5000. And let's try it out. Okay. And I've got my localhost up here. And hey, that's a kind of a nice looking, like purple, almost a KodeKloud styled background there. And we can see here we have our METAR weather reader. Enter an airport code to get a friendly weather report. So it says here for examples, KHAO, Portland Hillsboro, which is where, that's, like I said, the airport that's down the road from me. Let's try that one first. We'll say KHIO, And it even says, what is a METAR? Well, it's a standardized weather report used in aviation. Now, we can check this here, and it says clear skies, 81 degrees Fahrenheit, 27 degrees Celsius, which is accurate. Wind from the north at 0 knots. So if there's any wind that's coming from the north, 0 knots means pretty much nothing. And it's observed at this time, and that was when the METAR created, wind from the north, 0 knots, 10 plus miles of visibility, which means it's clear. Sky conditions, clear skies. Temperature again, dew point, 52 degrees Fahrenheit or 11 degrees Celsius. And even our barometric pressure at 30.05 nhg with the raw METAR. So it took all of this beautiful human readable stuff from this METAR right here. So let's check another airport. Let's see how things are doing in Los Angeles right now. Well, down there we have a few clouds at 25,000 feet, 75 degrees Fahrenheit. So oddly enough, we are hotter than Los Angeles today. 24 degrees, wind from the west at 11 knots. And here we go. We can check another airport. We'll say KJFK. This is New York, which is also 75 degrees Fahrenheit. Some broken clouds at 24,000, wind from southeast, etc. So I just wanted to create this as our base project that we're going to work on as we test out some of Claude Code's features and we build agents and things like that. We're going to do this all around this METAR weather reader. We're going to use this to create some documentation. We're going to create some tests and stuff like that. But this is how easy it is to get started. This is a vibe coding dream. As far as Claude Code, if you're doing anything in Python or JavaScript, it pretty much builds things for you very, very fast. All right, well, I'll see you in the next video. All right, now that we know our Python application works, this is something that I want to release publicly. So in order to do that, there's a few things that we need to do. We need to probably freshen up our gitignore file. And we need to create some documentation around this, mainly a README file, and things like that to kind of prep it for being placed in the public. Now we can look at some of these files and say, well, they could be probably cleaned up a little bit. Maybe .py could use a little more documentation. So I'm going to include that in there. Now, one of the things I can do here is say, I would like to commit the initial creation of this application. Help me create a good commit message, right? So you can just ask it simple things like that. Okay, and it'll even do it for you. Where here it says git add app.py, requirements.txt, static templates, and all application files to staging. Yeah. Now here we have git commit-m, add Flask METAR Reader web application. It does all of this stuff, generated with Claude Code, co-authored by Claude. Do I want to proceed? Yeah. Now if you really wanted to, you could probably remove that from the code message, the commit message that it was created by Claude Code, but I don't really care. It says this is now committed and ready. You can run it with Python app.py, and it'll be able to get friendly weather reports. So one thing I'm going to say is I want to release this publicly. Please, again, this is putting in, so if you're just vibe coding with no background in software development, you can build a lot of cool stuff, a ton of cool stuff, but sometimes you need to know what to ask for. So previous development experience really helps you out here. So since I have previous development experience, I know what to ask Claude to do, and some of this is add comments to app.py using Python best practices. Then create a README for GitHub that explains the application and how to install it. And for now, this could probably work. We'll add a little bit more, but this should go for now. And it's going to go through and put things here to PyDoc syntax or some type of syntax that's easy to understand. And we can see here, Flask METAR reader web application, blah, blah, blah. So I'm going to say, yeah, let's do that. And it's going to put this in. I'm going to say, yes, and don't ask again this session. So I'm just going to let it go through and throw all of these documentation notes in here. Now, this is all stuff that is put in through comments. It's generated with Claude Code, but this stuff is basically PyDoc type comments. Okay, and now it's done here. It says test the application after adding comments. And here it says from app, import test metar, result, decoding test passed, result summary. Yeah, we could add some testing in there too. And it says commit the documentation and code improvements. And here, do you want to proceed? Git add app. And like I said, you could change the commit messages so it doesn't say co-authored by Claude or whatever, but I'm being transparent here and just kind of letting everybody know that I use Claude Code for this stuff. It says now it's fully documented and ready for GitHub release. Users will be able to understand the purpose, install easily, use effectively, contribute, and deploy. Your Flask metar reader is now professional grade and ready to help aviation enthusiasts and weather lovers convert cryptic aviation weather codes into crystal clear forecasts. That's great. So we can take a look here at Git log, and we can see it's added some comprehensive documentation and code commits. This is great. So git status. All right, let's do git push, which now if I go to github.com, I can see I have my metar reader. It says, hey, what is metar? Example metar code, features, all the different features such as global airport support, responsive design. We don't have any screenshots yet, but I'll put those in there by hand. But we do have installation. And I can see here it says your username. We need to put in this. So by the way, I am going to leave this up if you want to check after the course is done. It's going to be github.com/jeremymorgan/KodeKloud-metar-reader. And here's the usage. Here's some different airport codes. Now, because I used Hillsborough Airport is nowhere near in the same league as LAX and JFK and O'Hare and etc. But since I used that as an example, I think Claude threw it in there. It says how it works. We have a metar decoding process. Then here we have the project structure, development, etc. How to put it into a Docker container. Everything you need. So if you want to fork the repository, you can check it out. Does this open an actual license file? No, it does not. So there's a few things that I need to check on here, but I just wanted to create some initial documentation. Now, here's something that is sort of interesting. And again, it's something you can probably remove if you don't want people to know this. However, you can see right here, contributors to Jeremy Morgan and Claude. So Claude is listed as a contributor here because I asked it to commit things for me. Now, like I said, you could probably remove that. You can remove it from the commit messages and you can commit this stuff all on your own without having Claude as a contributor. But in my case, I don't care. I have video evidence that Claude built this, right? So it's not a big deal to leave it transparent. But I just wanted you to know as a student that this does show up here where Claude is a contributor to the project. So for this is how we can kind of get this ready and get it prepped for public consumption. And so we're going to dig even deeper into it next. Okay, in this video, we're going to create some Python unit tests for this application. And we're going to do it by using Claude Code, of course. So one of the things you can do is do a front slash. And you can look here and we could say add a new working directory, manage agent configurations, submit bug, etc. So this is one of the things that, I kind of like to just show off once in a while as we go through, and just remember that we can export the current conversation to a file or clipboard, which is super important if you're wanting to keep track of things. But I just wanted to make sure that you knew about this slash window. It works. Now, one of the things I want to do with this is say, I would like to create a set of unit tests for app.py. Help me decide which type and help implement them. I want to use mock meter readings and test that they are interpreted correctly. All right, so now it's going to create a set of tests. And we're going to take a look at some of the to-dos and things like that and just see how it approaches it. First, it's going to analyze the meter decoder. Then it's going to design test structure using PyTest and mock meter data. So I was wondering if it was going to use PyTest or something else, but it's using PyTest. We're going to have some integration tests, some Flask route tests, and edge case tests. All right, let's see what it came up with here. We can see here we have test meter decoder. It's going to set up method test wind direction, test visibility, test clouds, weather phenomena, Celsius to Fahrenheit. And it looks like we've got a good set of tests here. So I'm just going to select yes. Now, one of the things that you'll notice here is it will probably run it for us because it likes to run things. So now we need to update requirements.txt. And here we're adding in PyTests. And it shows how to run the tests. So we'll do that. So we're going to open up a new terminal here. Pip install -r requirements.txt. And I forgot pip3. Awesome. And here, of course, we have PyTest, test app py -v. And we can see that we have some failed tests here. We've got a 404. Got a few different things here. So one thing we could do here is just say, run the tests and analyze the output. I'm actually glad these failed because we want to see if Claude Code is capable of doing this. Okay, we do have Python 3. And now it's running it and it's getting the same error message that I got. So now it's got some to-dos here. It's going to create a plan. And this plan, it looks like the only thing we're really updating is some weather phenomena stuff. So I'm going to say, yeah. Let's verify our fixes. Perfect. All tests are now passing. And now it wants to run tests with coverage analysis to see how much of our application is being covered by tests. So coverage is just how much of the code is being tested with our unit tests. And this gives a great example of what it tests. Wind direction conversion, visibility parsing, cloud layer decoding, weather phenomena, temperature conversion, etc. Real strings. And then it goes through our web routes and some edge cases, and this looks good. Update the README to include testing information. Okay, and now it says running tests. It includes a comprehensive test suite with 99% code coverage. There we go. And so I'll say yes. And then we are updating the diagram that's showing the file structure. All right, now I can say, create a commit message, commit this, and push it. Now this one might not work. I noticed the push did not work previously, but I think it can create a commit for us. And now we're going to get push. Awesome. Now let's take a look at our repository. We can see the README has been updated. We'll look for testing. And there we go. Here's all the test stuff, how to run tests, etc. And this is how easy it is to add testing to your project. Now, you want to go through, I'm kind of rushing through this a little bit, it feels like, because we're in a course environment. But you just want to go through and look at these changes that it's made, really examine things and make sure that it's doing exactly what you want it to do. Right? We want it to test all of these different things. Look at how it's testing it. Make sure that it's not creating tests that are designed to pass. And you should be good. So this is basically a way to add testing to our project. In this demo, we're going to look at autonomous task completion. Now, what does that mean? Well, we're going to see how Claude Code is far more than just a code completion tool, like a lot of these generative AI tools started out as, where they worked in an IDE and they completed some code for you. Claude Code goes far beyond that. And I'll show you how. What we're going to do here is what they call vibe coding a lot, where they just kind of specify an end result that you want, and you just kind of let the tool build out what you want to build. Now we're going to see how capable Claude Code is. So we're starting out here with simple React app, and this is just an empty folder, has nothing in it at all. And I'm going to say, yes, proceed. And now here we go. Here's our tips to get started, and we're at our initial screen. Now here's what I'm going to say. We're going to try to do this in one shot, just one prompt. Now it's going to take more than one, but with one prompt, we're going to see how much we can scale out and build something with Claude Code. So I'm going to say, create a complete authentication system for a React application. That's the first thing. Now that's kind of vague, but we want to say something like include user registration, login, password reset, JWT tokens. Let's see, email verification. What else do we want to put in there? A simple front end, of course. Now, basically what we're doing is kind of picture this like a funnel. And when we start out, and we'll talk about this even more in the prompt section where we talk about prompts, but we want to start out with a very wide, very open thing like create a complete authentication system. If we say that, if we just say create a complete authentication system, that could be anything, right? That could be C++, it could be whatever. But we're saying create it in React. So now we're saying complete an authentication system for React. So we've narrowed that down. Then we say, here's what we'd like it to do, because a complete authentication system is very subjective. I mean, that could be anything really, but we're saying include registration, login, password reset, JWT tokens, etc. We're being very specific. And we can also be specific about the technologies used. We already specified React. We could say use Express, MongoDB, and we can say modern security best practices. Now, before we begin, let's look at what this prompt is. And this is where it kind of goes beyond vibe coding, right? Because if we were just vibe coding, we're not really specifying much. We just say create an authentication system with a web app. So, but let's break this down to this prompt here that's saying it's an authentication system for a React application. We've said all the things it needs. We're saying to use these technologies, and to top it all off, we say use modern security best practices, because by default, we can assume, and we've talked about assumptions in this course, and we'll talk about them more. We can assume as us that Claude knows security best practices. But on the same token, Claude Code can assume that we don't need them, right? It's all assumptions. So you have to control assumptions as much as possible when you're building these types of prompts. Now, let's see how far this can get with just a single prompt. And here's where Claude Code goes beyond code completion. Is it can create files. We know that. We've already seen that. It can run commands in Bash. We've seen that. It can run test commands. It can do a lot of things. But can it do a npx create React app? We don't know yet. I'm going to assume, again, that it can. And I'm assuming that in this prompt. I'm assuming that it can do all of these things. And so let's go ahead and kick it off. Now, what we're going to see is what we've already seen before, where it starts to do the thinking. It starts to talk things through with you, and for lack of a better terms, and then it's going to come up with a to-do list. And here's our to-do list. Now, while this is working, let's check out the to-do list. If it doesn't run away from us, it's going to analyze the project structure, existing project structure, which is nothing. It's a blank folder. And then it says set up Express.js backend with MongoDB connection, install required security dependencies, bcrypt.js, JSON. See, those are things that may not have been installed had we not added that last little bit on the end of using security best practices. It's going to create a user model with MongoDB. It's going to implement user registration endpoint with email verification, login endpoint with JWT token registration, all kinds of stuff here. And we can see it's going to go down through this list, and now it's come to the very first question, the bash command. So now it knows that it's running in bash on my Mac, and it says, hey, this is what we need to do. Do you want to proceed? I'm going to say, yeah. And now we can see back-end, front-end already being created. And here we go. Okay, so I said a few minutes ago, is it going to know npx React app? And it does. And it goes even farther. It does template TypeScript, etc. And I'm going to say yes, and don't ask again here. And we'll just keep doing that. And we're just going to let this thing fly and let it do whatever it thinks it needs to do to make this happen. Now we've got another question here. And here it's saying, do we want to install Express and Mongoose and bcrypt and all this stuff that needs to be installed for the backend dependencies? Yeah. And I'm going to select here, don't ask again for npm install commands. If you think I need it, then install it. Okay. Now it says, do you want to make this edit to package.json? Package.json, if you're not familiar with Node, that's what manages all of the packages and dependencies in Node. Yes, and don't ask again this session. That way we can just let it set up the package.json however it thinks it needs to be set up, and we'll check it out once it's done. And if we look through here while it's creating, you can see it's already creating. We've got two separate applications here, back end and front end. It's creating all of these. And now it says, hey, do you want us to create model directory? Yep. And don't ask for make dir commands. Make all the directories you need to make. So we're essentially just kicking back and letting Claude Code do whatever it wants to do. Whether or not it ends up being what we want in the end, we don't know yet, but we're just letting it go. Here, let me create the user model and database schemas. Now we'll create the email service. Now you might notice this takes quite a while, but when you think about it, it's doing a ton of work. So is it really taking that long? If you were doing this by hand, it would take days. And now we can see we're getting down towards the end of our to-do list. So we can expect this to be done anytime. Okay, so now we can see here that we have a summary of everything that it did. And this is a long summary, but hey, it's been running for 10 minutes, right? And so we have our backend. It says complete authentication system. First off, backend, user model with secure password hashing, email verification, and account lockout, all of this stuff, right? It shows the front end and all the stuff it did with the front end. And then security best practices, which is what we asked for in that original prompt. It has password complexity requirements, account lockout after failed attempts, all this stuff. There's key features here, and these features are things that we asked for. And it went a little bit further as I'm looking at it. Like there's password reset via email. We asked for that. Did we ask for a protected dashboard with user management? Not exactly, but it created one. Responsive modern UI. I didn't mention that, but it created it because why wouldn't you want a responsive modern UI, right? It makes assumptions. Complete error handling. That's another thing that I didn't say needed to be done, but Claude made that assumption that you're going to want complete error handling. And it decided to throw TypeScript in there for type safety, which is excellent. You know, that's great. So we have some instructions here to get started. Start MongoDB, configure email, run backend, run frontend. It gives us all of stuff we need. So It says here the system is production ready with proper security measures, comprehensive documentation, and a clean, maintainable code base structure. Now, a lot of folks say, especially security people, do not generate production code with AI, right? So we just violated that rule. So I'm going to say it too, as a disclaimer. If you're going to build things for production, for your organization, or even your personal projects, if you're going to build something that the world's going to see, you need to audit it by hand and audit it personally. Now, Claude Code says this is production ready, and you know what? It might be production ready. Could be perfect, but you need to check and you need to verify and you need to make sure before you release this stuff out to the world for people to use. So with that disclaimer out of the way, let's check this out. Okay, and I'm taking a look at my environment file here, and I can see that it's port 5000. Here's my MongoDB URI, JWT secrets, etc. So this is all my config information. So let's go ahead and follow these instructions. Now what I'm going to do is create another terminal here. And we're going to leave this terminal open for Claude Code. We're going to do cd backend and npm run dev. And it looks like we're having some issues with MongoDB. These are some warnings, but MongoDB is connected. I do have a MongoDB server on my Mac here. And we'll go back to our Claude terminal here. And the next one is our front end. So I'll create another bash terminal for that. And it's asking if I want to let it access Google Chrome, which is fine. And look at this. We have a very nice looking application that we didn't have to build and sign up for an account. Now I don't have my email set up, so I don't know if this will actually work, but it says network error. So there is a little bit of a problem because I don't have it set up to an email account, but it's nice to see that this is created. This looks really nice. And with a little bit of work, I think I can actually have an application which I can log into and authenticate with and work with MongoDB and Express and all this stuff. Now, what I really wanted to show here is, we've got this back-end application, we've got a front-end application, we have a ton of code here. Now, let's say that you are a React expert. You are a developer who uses React and Mongo every day. You could run this simple prompt, go get a cup of coffee or some orange juice, let this thing run and come back and have it build out boilerplate that you would build any other time. And you could come and look through the code and say, okay, this looks good. I've done an audit. This is great. And something that may have taken a couple of days writing boilerplate code is instead done in 30 minutes. So what have we learned here about Claude Code in this? As far as autonomous building? Well, independent problem solving, right? It made a bunch of architecture decisions. Some of it with us, some of it asked us, and then some of it made assumptions and said, I think you want to do it this way. Multi-component orchestration. I mean, there's a whole bunch of stuff going on in this back end. There's a bunch of stuff in the front end. The production readiness part where it says, hey, this is ready for production. Again, there's that standard disclaimer that you don't want to just generate things and dump them into production. However, it does include in here testing and documentation and security things. This can be adapted basically for creating apps from the very beginning. Like if you've got greenfield apps, this is a great way to create like a proof of concept where you go to your boss and you tell them, hey, I've got this idea to do this thing. And they're like, okay, show me and I'll think about it. You can come back here to Claude Code and say, build this thing that's exactly like this. Show it to your boss, and your boss says, that's great, let's do this. She signs off on it, then you just go back and either modify what Claude Code generated, or you could generate it your way. Either way, this is one of the big benefits of Claude Code is it's very autonomous, it's very independent, and it can be super useful for doing things like this. So I just wanted to show kind of the autonomous task completion and how it all works and things like that. In this video, we're going to talk about Claude Code's environment and some configuration, just kind of settings that we can work with. Now, user settings is in your settings. I'll show you where those are located. And these are going to be your personal settings. So I'm on a Mac, so it will be in .claude settings.json, and that'll be the same for Linux. In Windows, it should be under program data, Claude Code, and in that folder. So let's just open this up in code. Okay, we'll do a Vim. And here, I don't have much, right? So I can add all kinds of stuff in here. And we'll do that here in a little bit. But for the most part right now, it's just some real basic stuff. Just shows the schema, what it's supposed to look like, etc. Now, there's another one here, another couple of places. So we'll go out of this. So settings.json is basically the settings that you use on your machine. Now, if you want to create something in your project folder, here you can create a .claude folder. And in here, you could create something like settings.json, which is what we just had in my user folder. Now, this is going to be the settings for the project. Now, these ones are settings that are checked into source control and shared with the whole team, right? So I'll show you a good example of a settings JSON from Claude's documentation, just so you can see what it looks like. Here's a typical settings JSON where we say, we allow bash npm run lint, we allow npm run test, we can read our ZSHRC, and then it says deny curl, can't read environment files, can't read secrets. And then we have a couple environmental settings here. Now, there's a ton of different environmental settings that you can choose, but here, like, we have Claude Code enable telemetry, OTel metrics exporter, etc. So let's say this is a typical Claude Code settings file. Now, what if you want something that's settings that aren't checked in? So this is a little more for personal preferences. Now, settings.json that's in your root folder is obviously going to be your personal settings for Claude Code that you want to use everywhere, but you might want to use personal settings per project, and that's where this comes in. So in here, we would create settings.local.json. Now, this won't be checked into source control, and it's useful for things like personal preferences, experimenting, things like that. And basically, Claude Code will configure Git to ignore this file if it sees it exists, right? So it will put it in a Git ignore, and you won't see it. Now, for enterprise deployments of Claude Code, they have enterprise managed policy settings. And so in there, I'll just show you the location where that would be located. On Mac OS, it would be Library, Application Support, Claude Code, Managed Settings. Linux or WSL will both be etc Claude-Code, Managed Settings. And then Windows, it's going to be Managed-Settings JSON, located in Program Data Claude Code. So that's if you want to set enterprise level stuff. Now, there's a whole bunch of different settings that you can put in here, right? And let's copy our settings here. And we have things like permissions, allow, etc. There are different settings in here, like we have environment keys. Now, we can just put base level settings in here, such as how long do we retain chat transcripts, for instance, in days. Default's 30 days, but you could put cleanup period days 20 or even 7. And we can actually, we'll pull these out here and just make our personal file. Now, there are certain things that you can put in there that's in the documentation. There's things like the allow, right? So we had permissions, allow. For this, there's all kinds of different stuff you can do here. You can put in all the different tools that you can use, things like that, web fetch, curl, all these types of things that you could put in here if it's part of using that. Or if you decide you don't want folks to use that, you can go into the deny here. You can do a default permissions mode in here. can say default mode, and we can see here, accept edits, bypass permissions, default, and plan. So there's quite a few different things that you can do with this. You can also add additional working directories to this by saying additional directories, some other project. All right, so you can put that in there. There's all kinds of cool stuff that you can do. If you go to this URL, and I'll just put it on the screen, https://docs.anthropic.com/en/docs Claude-code settings, you can see a whole bunch of different settings that you can do. Now, let's talk about the configuration system in a little bit more detail. So there are some other files that you can do here. You can do Claude.md, which has instructions and context that Claude loads at startup. So I can go in here, say new file, Claude.md. And this thing, you could actually tell Claude, create a Claude.md file for me that would be typical in a Python application. It starts to think about it. And it did say illegal operation on a directory. Maybe, yeah, I've actually some of this out. But here, it's created a Claude MD for me. So I'll say, yes, I want to make this edit. Now let's check out our Claude MD that it created for us. We can drop that in the Claude folder if we like it. And here it says METAR Reader application. This is a Flask web application that decodes METAR aviation weather reports. It shows how to set up the environment, how to run the application, how to test it. And then there's some code quality stuff here. So basically with this, we're giving Claude some context and we're telling it, so anytime you run Claude Code, it's going to go through this file and we're telling it, look, for code quality, you can install these. Let's use this for linting, right? Flake 8, etc. For code formatting, let's use black app.py, test app, etc. And it has the dependencies, so it tells Claude Code, here are the dependencies that we have. Here we have requests, etc. Then the project structure, basically telling Claude Code this is what it looks like. So this is what Claude Code calls a memory file. And it's basically instructions and context that loads at startup, and you can type in all kinds of stuff in here. There's also the settings files that we just looked at. There's slash commands too. And so you can add different configurations with this. So manage this, list and manage background shells, things like that. Config theme, and this configures some preferences here. Use to-do list, true. Now the to-do list, we've seen this in action, right? And I like the to-do list. Maybe you don't. You can actually turn it off here, but I've seen the to-do list where it goes through and it shows me all the stuff. I like it. Checkpointing, we want that to be true because you can run into some things where Claude makes some changes and they break everything and you're like, let's roll that back. That's where checkpointing comes in. Verbose output, auto updates, the theme, we had it dark mode, auto notifications, normal editor mode, model. This is pretty important, right? Because you can change between different models. We have a diff tool, just selecting auto, and auto install IDE extension. So these are all configuration things that you can do. Now here's another thing that we want to think about for when you're hiding sensitive files. So we're going to go back to our permissions a little bit here. And in our settings, see how we have allow and deny, etc. Now, one of the best things you can do is this right here. Don't let it read a secrets folder, for instance, or a build folder, things like that. And these are sensitive files. I mean, that's why they call them secrets, right? So this is something that's very important to know, is that you can allow Claude Code to look at your entire application, but you can say, hey, nothing in this folder or nothing of this file name, etc., things like that. So I just kind of wanted to show some of the configuration options and how you can do it. There's a ton of environment variables you can change here. You can put in your API key. You can put in the model you want to use. You can do all kinds of stuff. You can tell it whether you want it to go to bash and do bash stuff or not. You can do all kinds of stuff. And again, that's at that URL, docsanthropic.com/en/docs/cloud-code/settings. Now here's another cool thing to check out. You can type in Claude config list. And it looks like we've got an error this time, but you'll have to trust me when I say that a lot of times this works. For some reason, it's not working right here, but you can do Claude config list. You can do Claude config set. So you can say, Claude, what did we configure up in here that we could look at? Config set. And then you can type in different keys and different values. Like I can say Claude Code enable telemetry, put that to 0. And like I said, it looks like we're having a little bit of an error with this. But just know that most of the time you can list settings with Claude config list. You can see a setting with Claude config get, and then whatever the setting is, we'll try that. We'll see if that part works. Claude config get. Nope. None of these seem to be working right now, and it seems to really dislike this setting in particular. So here's our different keys. Now it should work where we can say Claude config list. There we go. And we can list some config things like allowed tools, has trust dialog accepted, etc. And this is based on this settings local JSON having basically nothing in it. But you can grab your settings, you can config settings, things like that. You can set a global configuration for something like auto updates. You would do Claude config set -G, right? And then the key could be like auto updates true. And so that sets it so Claude auto updates. You can do the color theme and just set this global theme dark, which it already was set to dark, but let's set it to light. And now it looks a little different. So that's the configuration settings. I just kind of wanted to show how these work and how the memory file works, things like that. And you can configure Claude Code to do a lot of really cool different things. So thank you for watching. In this session, we're going to look at managing long sessions effectively. So you might have short sessions where you just go in and ask a question or two and you pop out, but you'll also have longer ones. And so we need to take a look at what that looks like. And the way that we're going to do that is by building a fairly complex application with a series of prompts, and we're really going to try to push that context envelope to its maximum. And so what we're going to do is we're going to build a web-based Flask application that does image optimization. So what we want to do is reduce the quality of an image, reduce the colors, things like that. And a lot of this is going to require OpenCV. It's going to require some different command line things, and it's going to be a somewhat long project. So we'll start with a prompt. Now, we're going to talk in the next session about managing effective prompts, writing effective prompts, and so we'll touch on some of the stuff that we do here. But for now, I'm going to drop in a prompt to show you exactly what I'm talking about when we say writing a very specific prompt, and it's going to kick off this very long context type operation. Okay, so here's how we're going to put this together. First, we're going to start with requirements, right? Now I have a list of requirements here that I'll just paste in. One of the first things I'm going to say is build a single image optimization web app using Flask. And then I'm going to hit Control Enter, and I'm going to dump in my requirements. Now let's take a look at these requirements. I want a Flask web UI with drag and drop upload. I want to support JPEG, PNG, WebP. We'll reject SVG and GIF. We're going to rate limit this to 30 requests per minute per IP because we're going to host this publicly. We don't want it to get flooded. allow a maximum of 25 meg upload size, auto cleanup temp files. So we don't want to keep the people's images that they're optimizing. We just want to optimize them, send them out the door. Show before uploaded image and placeholder after pane. Use Pillow for image I/O. Keep OpenCV available for future features. And Dockerized with Unicorn for production. And we might actually remove that one because we're going to do some deployment stuff later. Now, we want to put in the deliverables. We want a complete Flask app with HTML elements, the requirements text, things like that. So we will dump that in here. And we're going to say we want a complete Flask app structure with routes config, validators and cleanup, HTML templates, static files, and requirements.txt. So since we've been so deterministic with this, we're basically saying this is exactly what we want. This should start kicking off and firing off things, and then we can add more later. So I'm going to press enter and let it go. You'll notice the to-do lists that are coming up here. And these to-do lists are pretty long. Now we get our first question here that says, do you want to make this edit to app py? I'm going to say yes, and don't ask again this session. Just create whatever needs to be created. Okay, now we're getting to the bash commands where it says, hey, do you want us to make templates? Things like that. And I'm going to say, again, yes, and don't ask again for maker commands. Make all the directories you need to make. Okay, now surprisingly it says, hey, this app is ready to use at localhost 5000. So let's take a look at what we have here. We have app.py that's loading in Flask, request, render template, JSONify, send file, a whole bunch of stuff here. But before we go and audit it, let's just run it. All right, it says that it's ready to use at localhost 5000. And when I bring it up in a browser, it says, it's access denied. So it's possible that this isn't running yet. So I can put in here, I'll copy and paste this error message. I am getting, and if you hold down Shift and Enter, you can do multiple lines. How do I run this? Now we know how to run this, but this is one of the things I want to show to kind of add to the context of our conversation. And it says, yeah, pip install. Do you want to do this? Sure, we'll do a pip install requirements.txt. And it doesn't look like it's creating a virtual environment, which could be a problem. So we're going to go back and say, hey, we need you to create a virtual environment. Now, if we look at this here, and this is the first time that we've done this in this course, it says, now let's run the Flask app, Python 3 app.py. Do you want to proceed? Yes, yes, and don't ask again. But now we're going to select no and tell Claude what to do differently. This is, like I said, the first time we've done this in this course. We're going to say, I want to create a Python virtual environment for this application. Now what it's going to do is it's going to create an environment and install the requirements from requirements.txt in it. And it says, hey, do you want to do Python 3-m VNV VNV? Yeah, that's exactly what I want you to do. It says, hey, do we want to activate and then install it? Requirements.txt? Yeah, we do. And it says, do you want to run it in a virtual environment? And yes, we do. And it looks like it's having a little problems with the output there, and it's kind of fixing itself. It's asking us, do you want to run it again? Let's try running it. And we've got some more issues here. So we're just going to let Claude Code work through those issues and fix everything. Now it says, hey, everything should work perfectly. And look, we have a to-do list with a list of features, right? So activate the virtual environment. And I'm assuming that that's something that we're going to have to do here. So it's not going to do it for us automatically. Let's create another bash terminal. And in that bash terminal, we'll go down here and say source VNV bin activate. And if you're a Python developer, this is all pretty basic stuff, but we're just going to copy and paste exactly as it says to do. Python app.py. Oops, and it's going to be Python 3 on this machine. And we have a problem here. It says port 5000 is in use by another program, but it's not. So what we need to do is find out why. So we'll copy these warnings. We'll put it in here. Now it's going to try to change it to a different port. Now, see, this is one of the things that I wanted to bring up in here and I wanted to kind of expose in this video is that when your context starts to get longer, now every tool will say we have the longest context and they'll have a huge amount. But as your context starts to get longer, you will notice a little bit of hallucination or weird things like this, where it's saying, hey, if port 5000 is blocked, and let's just change it to port 5001. Now we know that port 5000 is probably being locked by an older version of this application. Now it's not coming up, so it's not working, but I'm going to say, no, in Claude, what to do differently. And I'm going to say, how do I find out what's running on port 5000 and stop it? And we can even say, I am using Mac OS X, even though it knows this. It knows what operating system I'm running, but it's kind of handy to throw it in there sometimes, just in case Claude doesn't exactly know where it is. It's going to say, hey, we'll do LSOF-I. Yeah, that sounds good. I'm familiar with that command. Let's see what it does. Next thing it says, hey, do you want to kill this process? Port 5000 used by Control Center. This is likely the AirPlay receiver mentioned in the error. Yeah, we'll proceed. I don't think I need AirPlay right now. And I was assuming it was actually our app locking up port 5000, but it doesn't look like it. But it's still saying, let's do it on port 5001. So yeah, fine. We'll do it on port 5001. Okay, and it says it's ready to use. So let's find out. We're going to take our browser here and say port 5001 instead of port 5000. And look at this, we've got an image optimizer. Awesome. Drop your image here or browse files. This is great. Let's try it out. Okay, so one of the first things I'm going to do is go to my pictures here and drag and drop this picture of my family. That's my great-grandfather and my grandfather and several great aunts and uncles. And it says image optimization feature coming soon. What does that mean? Well, we'll copy it and find out. But other than that, I mean, this looks pretty nice, right? Can browse files and probably go that, but the image optimization feature is not ready yet. So I can go in here and say, I am getting the error. Optimization not ready yet. And that's all I'm going to say. Is, hey, it says it's not ready yet. Okay, now we look at it and it says image optimization is now working. New features. We've got real image optimization using Pillow with quality compression, before after compression, compression ratio display, etc., etc., etc. Well, let's see if it's actually changed. We've got our image optimizer open here, and we can browse and drop the image. So I'm going to take this picture again, the Morgans, and it says image optimization coming soon. So we'll refresh it just to be sure. And now we do have some optimization options here. Now this one is 99 by 704. It's 1019 1 kilobytes. This one, we can see we saved 91.9%. And now it's 90.84. We can hit optimize image, which that button doesn't seem to do much, or download optimize, and that'll download it to our downloads folder. So we're getting somewhere. But now we're going to put in even more prompts. We're going to add in some features to implement. And I'm going to say, I would like to add the following features. And let's look at the features here. A quality slider for JPEG WebP, resize by percent, 200%, 1000, ever. strip metadata toggle. So we can strip out metadata that's in there, strip out EXIF data, speed versus quality presets, update UI to show live preview of parameters, produce a real after image and show it side by side with before, keep no retention, delete the temp files after the response, and then hit enter. So in here, I'm basically putting in more features, and we're just going to keep adding more, and we're going to make this context as long as we possibly can to see if it starts spitting out some errors. Okay, now we've got a result here, and it's showing all of the features that it added, right? So advanced features now available. New controls, speed versus quality presets, smart features, backend improvements, how to use it, etc. So now, of course, we'll bring up our image optimizer and we'll refresh it. It says drop your image here. We'll drop in this picture. And now we see a bunch of new options. We've got quality all the way down to 1, all the way up to 95. We've got resize, percentage. We can say we want speed, we want max quality. So for this one, I'm going to say max quality. We're just going to leave it at 100%. We have options to strip the metadata, to auto orient, and the quality. Let's set our quality to like 5 and see just how bad this image looks. So we'll click on optimize image, and we can see that we don't have output. Now, if we look at some of the console output, we can see some evidence of a problem. So I can take this and copy console. It says failed. Morgans.phd failed to load. The server responded with a status of 500, internal service error. So I'll just dump that in there. And our text here says, hey, internal service error. The server responded with a status of 500, etc. And we'll see if Claude can figure this out. And it has. It's showing some stuff here where it's trying to, looks like add a little bit more error correcting. Try uploading an image now. So I'm just going to reload. We'll see if Claude has fixed the issue. So I'm going to move that quality way down. Click optimize image, and there it is. Now, this is the reason I moved the quality down is to test it. If we put the quality at 1 and click optimize image, you can see it looks pretty terrible. If we do quality 95, and it looks like we're still having some errors here. So I'll just do this one at a time. Now, if this one, we do quality 95. Well, the other one that we show is relatively the same quality. So I'm going to copy this and let Claude know, hey, we're still getting an error. Okay, now it's saying that it made a bunch of changes. You can upload an image once, optimize multiple times with different settings, see real-time changes as you adjust sliders and presets, and compare different optimization results. So the problem was, I was trying to optimize something after I'd already done it, right? So I'd loaded this up, optimized an image, and I tried to optimize it again. And that didn't really work. So now Claude Code knows what we're trying to do. So I can click optimize image. I can slide it back and click optimize image, quality 1. Well, quality 1 looks terrible. This looks like the pictures we used to see in the 90s, right? But if I go to 95, it's there. And if I want to make it bigger, I can make it bigger or smaller. Now we've made it into a little thumbnail. Look at that. Or we can make it bigger. So our application is getting really advanced and really good. So let's try to add a few more things to it. And again, we're trying to build up this context to see how big we can get it and see what kind of things happen when we do that. Now, the whole reason for doing this, of course, is, we're building up this application. We're kind of starting out with a base level, we're adding more features, etc. But what we want to do is put this into a session and think about it like a session. So it really is a session here that we're working with, and it goes all the way up to the very beginning where we kind of describe the application. But what we want to do is start taking notes on this and keeping track. Now, why do we want to do this? There's two different reasons. For one, Claude Code getting a large context will cause problems. So one of the impressive things about Claude Code is that the context is enormous. I mean, relatively speaking, compared to other tools, you can carry on these conversations for a very long time. I've built some random things where I've just tried to keep going and going and going and going. And eventually it does start to have some issues and hallucinate a little bit, but it takes a really long time. But when we create the session notes, we're creating notes for us so that we can say, okay, this is what we did here. This is what we did here. But another reason to have session notes is Claude Code will look at these session notes. So one of the things I'm going to do is we're at a good place here in our image tools, right? So I'm going to say git add. We're going to add all of these files, and we've created quite a big application here. We're going to commit it. Initial application. Okay, and so we're committing that, and we're saying at this point, this is where we're at. Now, I want to go over here to Claude Code and say, help me create a session notes.md for this project. And now it's puzzling. And like I said, there's always some kind of funny verbs that they come up with here. Now, what I'm doing is with this prompt is I kept it very simple and direct, and I'm assuming Claude knows what I'm talking about when I say I want to make a session notes.md. Okay, and there it is. When I click on this, first we'll take a look at this, and it says, hey, I've created a comprehensive session notes MD file. And like I said, this is something that's for us, and it's for other developers that are going to jump into your project in Claude Code itself. Claude Code will look at this file and kind of know what it did in the past. So we can see here what's included. We have project overview and feature summary, technical architecture breakdown. This is all of the stuff here that we have done. And when you look at session notes MD, you can see this is all the stuff that we've done in this single session. So we did some advanced optimization controls, user experience, backend, front end, file structure. All of the stuff was created in this session. It says project completed successfully. However, if we want to, we can start updating this because we're going to do some additional stuff. So I'm going to say up here, I'll just put, and this isn't really kind of carved in stone, set in stone law about a way to do this, but we can say session 1 completed here just to, say, and here it's trying to put in a date, but here it just says session 1 completed and then all of this stuff. Now I can say down here, session 2, and we could say something like session 2 focus, what we want to do with session 2. Implementing advanced features. Sorry, can't really type today. Now I want to add in some stuff here. Like I want to add in sharpen controls. And we can even describe what we want it to do. Sliders for sharpening, blur, contrast, brightness. That actually sounds great. We want to add in something like format conversion. And what do we want to do for format conversion? Well, the ability to convert between formats. Looks like that's a pretty good suggestion there. And this will be kind of a stage 3, right, of this, just kind of adding some extra polish. Now I can keep this in the session notes and then go down here and I can just copy this in and say something like, I would like to add in additional features outlined in session notes. And then I can put it in here too to be firm about it and say, I want these sharpen controls. I want this format conversion. And then we'll hit enter. So this is the first part of managing a session, is actually using the session notes. And now that we have gotten pretty far with this thing, we can go back and look at some of our session information also. All right, looks like we're done. Well, at least Claude Code is done with what we've asked it to do. Let's take a look at it. Session 2, advanced features complete. I've successfully implemented all the requested advanced features. New image enhancement controls. We have a sharpen blur slider, a contrast slider, a brightness slider, and format conversion. Enhanced UI layout, 3-column responsive grid for better organization. I didn't ask for that. But again, Claude Code makes a lot of assumptions, and sometimes those assumptions are things that I should have put in. And a year ago with a different tool, if I didn't put that in, it wouldn't happen, right? So some of this is like Claude Code can look at it and say, this is a lot of features for this tiny window that we have right now, so we're going to redo it. And it made it mobile responsive, format flexibility, etc. I think we should try it out, but first I'm going to say, this is great. Please add it. Well, actually, let's try it out before we add it to our session notes. So we're going to try this out. Okay, so we're going to reload our image optimizer, and I'm going to click Browse Files. We're going to take that same file, and we can see we have some additional settings, and we have balanced, speed, max quality, same as before. However, I can see here we now have a sharpen, real sharp, really blurry. Let's try that out. Optimize image. There is a very blurry version of it. We'll go over here to sharp. Optimize image. And we can see that the sharp doesn't quite work. Now, why is that? Well, it might be because it was unable to sharpen after we blurred it. We can see a problem here. Float object cannot be interpreted as an integer. So I'm going to click that again. Copy this. And we can go into Claude and say, I'm getting an error when sharpening. And dump in the error. And this is pretty basic stuff we've all done a million times at this point. Okay, and it says it should work smoothly now. So we're just going to blindly trust that it will. Open up this image again. Sharpen. Optimize. There we go. And this is actually a sharper image here. So let's try contrast. And we'll just go with extreme contrast. Doesn't seem to be doing much. We'll go with low contrast. And maybe we have to upload the image again. So we'll load this up and say, I want to do max quality, a little bit brighter, a little more contrast, and a little more sharp. Optimize image. And then I say, okay, that looks good. I can click download optimized. And there we go. We can see our optimized image. So this is pretty good for this second set of features here. So the only thing I'll say is I noticed when I apply one setting, or I should say when I change one setting and apply it, then I have to re-upload the image to make another setting change. Can we make it so that it, and this is going to be a significant refactoring by my guess, so that we can make several different changes that will take place anytime we hit optimize. So I hope I'm being fairly clear about that. Okay, and it looks like it's done here. Now upload your image once, optimize multiple times, and see real-time results. So let's see. We'll reload our image optimizer with our image. And I'm going to say sharpen, optimize image. Okay, that is sharper. Then I'm going to go to blur, optimize image. still doesn't quite work, but we can put that in like a to-do or something and try to get Claude Code to do it again, because it looks like now that we've done one change, we really can't do any other changes to it. It's kind of a one-shot deal. Just to make sure, I'll do a hard refresh. Do it again, but it still looks like you've got one shot, basically. So we'll reduce the quality, we'll blur it, we'll up the contrast, up the brightness. If we do all these at the same time, then we get exactly what we look for. But if we try to undo that, we can't. And some of it is kind of the nature of images in that you can't really add quality back to an image, right? So you can save an image high quality, but being the nature of the format, you can't just add the quality back in. So I think for now, we could say it's okay that this is a one-shot thing, and maybe it's something that we'll fix later. Now I can say, this will work. Can you update session notes with this information? Now in here, this technically is still session 1, right? So if we look here, performance metrics, etc., now that I look at it, it looks like it already did update this for me. So if I go up here, it says session 2 completed, advanced stamp, and there's our sharpen blur slider, etc. So it did already do it for us. Now we'll look here, and it says, here's what was added. Great. Now, here's some takeaways I want to give you before we dive in even more with this, is just some kind of takeaways and pro tips. You want to break your work into logical chunks, right? So what we did here is we did this long, basically very long session in Claude, all in one session. When we talk about sessions in Claude, it means when you type in Claude the first time to when you exit Claude. So that's one continuous session. It's a little confusing. We put session 2 in here. Technically, a session is when you start up Claude and then when you end it. So you want to break it into logical chunks. You did notice that it didn't quite fix my bug here, and I don't want to dig too deep into this with this video because it's a little off topic to kind of get in the weeds, but there is a possibility that this context has become so large and so abstract that it's like not really understanding what it needs to do, and it's not quite, or it's just hallucinating or something like that. I can't really say for sure without spending a lot more time on this, but trust me when I say if you don't break the work down and you make really long sessions, you will start to see hallucinations and things like that. And one good thing that's best practice is to use the session notes and summarize the progress that you've made after you've made it. And then when you start new features, you want to come in and add those new features and say, this is what I want to do. Now, when you're doing major refactors, you want to start fresh sessions, right? So basically, if you're doing something that's huge and big, it's really easy to just exit out of Claude Code and go back in. And I'll show you how you can grab some of that session information, hint, session notes MD, to when you create a new Claude session, it doesn't have to start from scratch, right? It doesn't have to reinvent the wheel. It can just read the session notes and keep going. So here's some things that you don't want to do. You don't want to try to do an entire project in one session. We're doing this for demonstration because I wanted to show you, a big long session, but don't do this. Don't try to do the entire project with one session. And don't assume that everything, that you've done will be remembered by Claude, right? Don't assume that it's going to remember everything from hours ago or way back early in the session, because that may not be true. Now, when you notice degraded performance, don't just keep going with that session and keep iterating. There's a couple of reasons. For one, it can burn up a lot of money. If you're paying for this with API calls, it can burn up a lot of money to kind of go in circles on a problem that may be solved if you just quit the session and start another session. And another thing that you don't want to do is you don't want to expect Claude to remember this across, say, a few days. So if you have a session going, and even if the session's open on your laptop and you leave it somewhere and you come back to that session a few days later, don't expect Claude to maintain that context. Highly, highly likely that it will not. It will probably then come back and try to attempt to figure it out, right? So when you see performance problems like we started to see here, that's a good time to kind of look at things and say, is this session big? Is it too big, etc.? Do we need to trim this down? And so Claude Code works best with its own constraints, and we'll talk about that a little bit. But what you can do is you can ask Claude too. There's a few things you can do, like a canary test. And I'm going to do this in the same session before we close it. I'm going to say, can you recall what database we're using? Which we're not using a database, but we're going to see if Claude knows that. And so it's starting to think now. And it says the app was designed as a simple, stateless image processing tool without any database requirements. So that's correct. So that's some of the things that you can ask. And by asking these questions, you can tell how the context is doing, right? If it comes back and says, you know what, I have no idea. Or if it comes back and says, oh, you have a MariaDB database, but we deleted it earlier, and you know that that's not true, then it could be a chance that your sessions are getting a little bit long. So you kind of want to do a health check once in a while, right? And it's basically this kind of looking at it, asking it, hey, what did we do here? Or something like that. Now, if we look at this, here is how we can free up our context. We can clear, reset, you see here, which is clear conversation history and free up context. This is the same as exiting Claude and restarting it again. Sort of. If you don't trust it, then the best way, of course, is to shut off Claude and start it back up again. And there's another one that's compact. Clear conversation history, but keep a summary in context. So we can just say, compacting conversation. And we could say, this is pretty good. We've got a lot done with this super long set of instructions, so we can compact it. Now, another thing that we can do as soon as it's done compacting is we can start up another session that has new context, but we can give it a little bit of history with session notes MD. Okay, and now it says here, previous conversation compacted, it says here, read in session notes, read app py, main.js, style.js, etc., to-do list, compacted it, see Control-R to see full summary. So let's do Control-R. Showing detailed transcript. Let's go back and just kind of look at this. Implemented virtual environment for clean dependencies. All user messages. Here's my message. Build a single optimization web app using Flask with detailed requirements. Serving it up. There was an error. We fixed it. Some pending tasks. Current work. Optional next step. The user's immediate requests have been satisfied. No further development work was explicitly requested. So this is all stuff that we can rely on session notes for, and we have our session notes here. So, of course, we can just do boot Control-R, go back to our prompt. We can exit out of Claude. Now we're completely out of Claude. So what are we going to do all this context? Well, obviously, any question that we ask is going to jump back into the files, but it's not going to have the context. It's not going to know everything that we did here. It's going to try to guess it. It'll try to reverse engineer and look at our code and say, okay, I see this, I think the point is this, etc. But an easy way to do it, of course, is to do Claude and say, read in session notes.md and whatever you want it to do. All right. And so that will load up this history and give Claude a little bit of history. Another thing we could do is you could copy this whole summary that we had and put that and add that into an additional file and say, hey, here's another summary. Here's some more stuff you might want to look at. But basically, the easiest way is say read in session notes and create some features to X. So just for some kind of pro tips, again, break work into logical chunks. Don't do these huge, long sessions like this. Try to summarize your progress before starting new features. So try to summarize things in session notes or some other place before you start new features, and keep fresh sessions. Start fresh sessions for major stuff or just to be safe. Just start a session and say, pull in session notes, and let's go for it. Don't try to do an entire project in one session. Don't assume that Claude's going to remember this stuff just because it's in the same session, etc. But take control of it by using these session notes. So I hope this is clear. Now you can see that we have this set up. We can do things like we can deploy it, stuff like that. I think we're going to leave this application pretty good for now, but we might want to jump in and do some features later or something like that. And we're going to keep digging into Claude Code and this amazing tool. Let's go to the next task. Now, in this demo, we're going to talk about writing effective development prompts. So writing the right kinds of prompts will get you the right kind of results. Now, we've talked a lot in this course about assumptions and how Claude will make assumptions based on what you say. Some of those assumptions are perfect and they're great, and some of them maybe not so great. And that's not necessarily the fault of Claude itself. For instance, we can say, make a login screen. Now, this is an example of a bad prompt. And what do I mean by bad? Well, it's just not that great. It's not specific. It's not clear. It's very vague. All of these things will make for interesting results. So if I say, make a login screen, now it's made some assumptions here. And those assumptions could be based on my previous experience with Claude, maybe things I've built in the past, or maybe it's going to look at GitHub and say, what is the most common thing? So it says here, I'll create a login screen for your Express application. Let me first explore the project structure to understand the current setup, etc. Now, actually, I do want to make a login system with Express. I'm not sure how it knew that, but in this case, we're really not going on the right path. So we'll see here, listed two paths, and it says read illegal read operation on a directory. Let me check the contents. There are no contents. This is just an empty folder. So then it says find, and it wants to look for JS, JSON, HTML, CSS, etc. Now, the reason it inferred that we would want an Express application is probably because the name of the project or the name of the folder that we're in is Express Login Demo. And that's probably how Claude Code guessed that we want to do this in Express. But if you look at it, it says, hey, we want to look at some files. Now, I'm going to say no and tell Claude what to do differently because this is just kind of a silly request. Make a login screen, make a login system. It's just too vague. So Claude will ask multiple clarifying questions. It'll create something generic, and that might not meet what we want, right? Since we've called this Express login demo, it says we'll use Express, but if we didn't name this folder that, maybe it'd try to create something in React or Vue or who knows. So we need to be specific. And so one problem here is if we let it assume what our intent is, it may create something wildly outdated or weird or something that we don't want, right? It might say, oh, maybe this person wants a DOS app and we'll build that. Or maybe it wants a Go app or a Python app or whatever. And another problem is it probably won't throw in error handling, validation, security, all that, because it's just going to try to make a guess of what you're trying to create. Now, here's another thing that we can do that we can make this better. Now, I did back out of this and say, no, Claude, don't make something. I'll be more specific. So I'll copy and paste this in here. And this will be an example of a better prompt. I'm going to say, create a post /API/auth login endpoint using Express.js. Now, that is what we're named here. So Claude inferred that, but that's actually what I want with the following requirements. For our input, we need an email and a password. Both are required. Must be a valid email, must be a valid password. We want to validate that input using Express Validator. Check if the user exists in PostgreSQL database. Compare the password using bcrypt. Generate a JWT token with 24-hour expiration. And then the response should be success or failure. And we'll define what those should look like. And then I say include error handling for database failures and validation errors. So I'm going to hit enter. Now, this is what we would call a better prompt. Now, I said the last prompt was a bad prompt. And I kind of explained why. This is an example of a much better prompt. We're being very specific. We're saying we want to use Express.js, right? Here are the fields that we need. Here's what I want you to do with them. Here's the database that I want you to use. Here's how I want you to compare the password. And I want a JWT token, etc. We're getting very specific. And the more specific you are with your prompts, even the very beginning prompts, usually the better result you will get. So we will let this run. Now, if we look at this, it says, I see this as a new project with only Git initialization. I'll create the complete Express.js project structure with the following login endpoint. And we have a to-do list. Now, in this course, we've seen a bunch of to-do lists, right? So we've seen how they go through, and Claude Code will present this to-do list, and it will go step by step and do all the things. Here it says, initialize Node.js project with package.json. Do we want to do that? Yeah, let's do that. And next it says, do we want to install the required dependencies, which are Express and Validator, bcrypt, JSON, etc.? Yes. And now it says create basic Express app structure, and I'll select yes. Now here's something to notice. It says, hey, do we want to write this environment file where we have port 3000, a JWC secret, etc.? And yes, we do. And that is something that we will have to create. So we'll have to create a actual Postgres database with a login and password, etc. But it's going to create all of the software that's wrapped around that. And it says here, do we want to make routes? Yeah. And as we go through, I can say yes for this session only and just let Claude go, right? Let it just make all the things that it wants to make and needs to make. And then we can go back and test it later. Now, I mentioned that we're going to have to create a Postgres SQL database, and you can see here that it's actually making a database schema file for us, which will make things really easy because we can just run that into the Postgres database. Now, one way that I could have been more specific with the prompt is to say the database backing that I want. I could have said SQLite, MySQL, Microsoft SQL, whatever. That would have been another way to specify things more. And so that's one of the things you want to think about your prompts. You want to look at them and say, is this specific enough? Now, here's a pro tip that's really awesome, is you can take the prompt that you want to use, you can dump it into an LLM like ChatGPT, Gemini, Grok, Claude, whatever you like, and say, act as an expert prompt engineer, or act as an LLM, and tell me how to make this prompt better. And it will go through all of the basic LLMs that are out there right now, will go through and it will ask you a few questions and it will tell you, here's a better prompt to use. So that's something that you should always try as you're building your prompts to try to make them a little bit better. Now here it says, we've got the whole to-do list is checked off. So it says the post API auth login endpoint has been implemented with all the requested requirements. Email validation using Express Validator, password 8-character minimum, error messages. We have Postgres integration here. We have JWT token generation. We have a specified response format. We have what to do on failure. Comprehensive error handling. So 503, 401, 400, 500, all of these are handled. Here's the files that were created to use this endpoint. Configure your Postgres SQL database credentials, and run the schema SQL to create the required tables. Now, what is the difference between the two things that we did here? Well, the difference is, in this case, Claude is building exactly what we need, right? We asked for a specific thing, and it's delivered that specific thing. It includes all the security features, proper error handling, things like that, and there really are no clarifying questions needed most of the time when you get very specific with your prompts. And it's pretty awesome. So this kind of goes into a formula that I like to use, right? I like to use this formula and I call it context, action, details, examples. And what I'll do is I'll just create a little file here. We'll call it examples MD. And this is going to be context, action, details, examples. And we didn't do all of these with the initial prompt that we did here, but this is something that we can really utilize to our advantage. Now, context, right? What do we do with context? Well, we know that context sets the stage, right? It basically says, here's the past information that you need to care about. So we'll say sets the stage. Now, what's good and what's bad with context? Now, bad is something like add a feature, add a new feature, add something. Good is, I have an Express.js API with MongoDB. Current routes are /routes/API. Add a feature that does blank. Now, as far as action goes, what does action do? Well, it will be specific. So instead of just saying, do this thing that you should do, with action, it will be clearly defined, right? So a bad example would be make it better, right? So the context would be, look at my software. Action is make it better. Good would be refactor this function to use async await instead of callbacks or something like that. Something very specific, which ties into details. Now with details, we want to include constraints. Now with action, we're telling it exactly what it should do, right? We're saying, here's what we'd like you to do. With details, that's a good place to insert constraints. So instead of something like a bad example would be add validation for this, right? Claude Code could probably figure it out. So a good example would be add validation that ensures email is unique in the database and password meets OWASP standards. So that's an example of good details. Now with examples, what are we doing with examples? We are showing desired patterns. Now, if you've worked with LLMs a lot, which you probably have, you'll notice that the patterns are everything. So as you're going through and you're saying, please make this thing, as soon as you say thing looks like this, now the final step is examples, which is where you show your desired patterns. And that's where you're saying, hey, this is what this should look like. So a bad one is make it like all the other applications out there, auth applications out there. You could say something like, make it a typical authentication app. Something like that is way too vague, and it doesn't really give an example of what success looks like to the LLM. But if you say something like, follow this pattern from our existing endpoints, and type in your endpoints, something like that, or follow this pattern from the OWASP examples. And that basically says, hey, here's how we want it to look. And notice that sometimes if you're typing in these vague prompts, it will just waste a lot of time, honestly. You will go through and say, make this thing like this, and you'll do these vague prompts, and things won't really go the way you want, and so then you'll have to go back and get more specific anyway. So if you just remember this context, action, details, examples, then you can say, here I'm going to put in my context. I'm going to tell it what I want it to do. I want to tell it what I don't want it to do, or what world I want it to live in. And then examples, this is what I want it to look like. And sometimes you can get this down to one prompt that will generate a ton of code. So the big things here are the 3 C's of good prompts. And I'll put that here. And the first C is clear, which means no ambiguity. Don't leave things open for interpretation unless you want the LLM to get creative. Basically, you want to say, this is what I want. The next C that we care about is complete, right? All the requirements are stated, all of the constraints are defined, all of the end results that you want are defined. And the last one is contextual. So what we're saying here with contextual is we want to include the relevant background. We're basically saying, here's what we have now, here's how we've built it, here's how we'd like it to look moving forward. Now remember, there's a time investment rule here. If you spend a minute writing a good prompt, you can save 10 minutes of revision. And that's no exaggeration. If you spend time upfront getting the right prompts as you're going through, those prompts will generate things that are more specific, more accurate, better for your intended goal, And if you want to save time and just put in vague prompts, you'll end up spending a lot of time refactoring those and saying, oh, that's not what I meant this, etc. So remember, there's kind of a Goldilocks zone when it comes to prompts here that like we've put in. If you're too vague, Claude will guess. It will infer things, and it will basically make assumptions, which we've talked about a bunch in this course. If it's too verbose, right, the other side of that, where you have just a ton of words and a ton of explanations and tons of details, then Claude gets a little bit confused. And sometimes it's like, well, I hear what you're saying. I see that you have 53 things that you want me to do, so I'm going to try to do 45 of them. And then you never know what you're going to get, right? So just right, which is the middle, is clear, structured, with examples, as we've shown here. So these are some good prompting techniques that you should keep in mind and you should use while you're using Claude Code, and you'll see some amazing results. I've worked with a lot with Claude Code lately, and I've noticed that when I put in the right prompts and I put in the right info, I get really good output. So I wanted to include this demo as kind of a way that we can look at clear, complete, contextual prompts that will get you exactly what you're looking for. Now, in this demo, we're going to talk about using multiple files in your projects, project navigation, and how Claude Code kind of handles that. And it's really cool. I mean, you can do things like, say, show me the file structure of this application. Right? It'll start kicking off and we'll go through and look at everything. And we have some of this stuff. We've got it documented in other places, but we can always look at this and say, oh, that's cool, right? And you can say, analyze our project structure and tell me what are the main components, how are the routes connected to controllers? We'll just come up with some different things like this. What database are we using? And Claude will go through and answer a lot of questions about this. Now, where does this come in handy? Obviously, none of us really like to jump into giant legacy code bases that we don't know anything about. And this is where Claude can really help, because it's not just focused on one file, one task, one function. It'll look at your entire project like this. And so we can see the main components, server.js, that's going to be our main application entry point. That's the PostgreSQL connection pool, authentication routes, schema.sql. And then it says route controller architecture. It shows main server mounts auth routes at API auth router handles, etc. And the database is Postgre, with a connection via PG library with connection pooling, single users table, email index for performance schema. All right, so we can go through and kind of look at this, and we can even have it look at other projects. But one of the things we could do here is, since we have these main components as names, we can say something like, I would like to change the database. And we're actually going to do this in a future video, but I would like to change the database to MariaDB. And we have to say at some point, otherwise it'll start changing it for us. What files might be affected? Okay, we can see here, based on the code base analysis, these files would need changes for MariaDB migration. Direct changes required. And it shows schema changes, environment variables. This application uses parameterized queries, which helps, but you'll need to update the placeholder syntax and connection pool configuration. So this is some good stuff to know. And this basically shows how Claude knows things about your project, right? It can correctly identify relationships between files, what files do, and things like that. Now, one of the things that you can do here also is you can make changes to specific files by naming them. You can say, add X to config database.js. You can say, add something, refactor something in this file. So you do have file level access, but As we can see, Claude also looks at a bunch of different files and examines how they're all related. Now, where does this kind of thing come in handy? Well, when you're doing refactoring, you can specify the files that you want to refactor to change. You can use this, and the next step can be, okay, change it. And it could just be that you're saying, hey, analyze this code base and tell me what to change. Maybe you know that all these things need to be changed, but you want to make sure that Claude knows before they start making changes. Now, you can do this here in your queries. So this is file clustering, right? So based on the code base analysis, etc., direct changes required, schema changes, you can say, make changes to these files. And you could actually just copy this right here, replace PG dependency with SQL tool or MariaDB. And then you can say schema changes, change the schema here, and so on and so forth. So this is just a cool pattern and a cool way to do this. You know, you can tell it what it's about. You could say something like file name, package JSON, purpose, maintain registry of packages used, change, add in MariaDB instead of PG or whatever, right? So these are things that you can go in and you can take this information and make it useful. So Claude is very useful as far as knowing the code when you're working in a file. You know, if you just crack open this code and start looking at it, you can ask Claude questions about it and say, hey, tell me what this does, and add some comments here. Or it'll also take a more meta view of the entire project, as we can see, and look at multiple files all over the place and how they're related and how they're kind of put together. So this is really cool stuff, and it's a cool feature in Claude that I wanted to show you. Now, here's something else that you can do that's pretty interesting with Claude Code, is you can say, do not, I guess I don't have to yell, I don't have to capitalize it, right? But you can say, do not modify these files. And you can request changes. And of course, if the changes have to be modified in those files, then Claude will say, hey, I need to modify that, right? But you can say, do not modify these following files when you do something. This can be handy if you have something where you're working on a problem and it's just kind of spinning out of control and it's updating things that you don't want it to update. Or you can say that you just want, you know, this particular set of code to not be touched. You can say only create and modify and specify the files. And again, if the files do need to be, if different files do need to be modified, Claude will let you know. Now there's another cool thing here. The last thing I'll show you is you can just verify. You can say something like this. Verify these files were refactored. And you can say, give it a list of files and say, verify these ones because these are the ones that I wanted you to touch. So you can do a verification. Now, here's a few do's and don'ts when it comes to files, right? So don't say, here are all the files in our project and a massive paste of every single one. Claude knows those are the files in your project, and it's really kind of a waste of cycles. But you can say, here are the 3 files related to user authentication, please modify them. You don't want to just paste in file names with no relationship context and just say, here's a list of files, build an auth system. Instead, you want to say something like, these files work together, the list of files, and these make up our auth system. We want to make some changes. Some of the things that you don't want to do also is if you're doing mixed project context, you don't want to say, like, use the React components from project A and put it in here, right? Because we're not running React in here. So you could say something like, here's the logic from our React project for authentication. Adapt this pattern for Express. Something like that. Those are just some kind of do's and don'ts. And this is a great feature with Claude, the way it's able to work with files, and it's something cool that I wanted to show you. In this demo, I'm going to show you how Claude Code can work with APIs in two different ways. First, we'll use Claude to help us call an existing API. And in this case, we'll look up a city's coordinates with the Nomatim service and grab the weather from OpenWeather. Then we'll flip it around and we'll use Claude to build our own API with Fast API so anyone can type in a city and get back weather data. Now, the goal is to show that Claude doesn't just write code, it helps you connect different pieces together quickly and turn them into something that you can run. So, we're going to start with a basic API call. I have some prompts prepared, and we're going to let Claude Code just build this software based on what we're going to tell it. So, for the first prompt, I'm going to say, write a Python script that takes a city name, uses the Nominatum API to get its latitude and longitude, then calls the OpenWeather API, and the key will be in the OpenWeather API key environment variable to fetch weather. Print the city, coordinates, temperature, and conditions. So now we'll let Claude Code take off, and we'll see what it comes up with. Now, I did specify, I wasn't super specific with this, but I did specify just basically the clear goals that we want to do, right? We want it to be in Python. We want it to take a city name, use an API, get the lat and longitude, then call the OpenWeather. So we basically have laid out how we want it to work, but we haven't gotten super detailed with it yet. And we can see here it has already created weather.py. And I'm going to say yes. Go ahead and create that, and we'll take a look at it. Now, if we look at weather.py, we can see we have a get coordinates function here. We have a get weather, and in our main. So let's look at get coordinates. In here, we're going to call this Nominatum OpenStreetMap.org search. We're going to use a JSON format search, and we're going to search by a city name. Then we're going to use that response. We're going to get the URL parameter headers. We're going to format that response and take that lat and longitude here and return it. Now, if it doesn't work, we're going to say, hey, city name is not found. Return none. If there's any other kind of errors with fetching coordinates, it will be produced here. So this is good, clean code. I mean, we don't really need this try-catch type thing going, but it's really nice that it has it in there. And I say we don't need it as in we don't necessarily need it to function, but we definitely should have it. And Claude Code puts it in here for us. If we look at get weather, we're getting weather data using OpenWeather API. We're sending that lat and longitude. We're setting our API key, units, metric, etc. Now, I'm not super familiar with this API, with either of these APIs, so I'm not really sure it's going to work. However, we're going to see how well Claude Code handles this. So I'm going to save it, and it says, created weather.py script. We need to export an OpenWeather API key. And then we just put in Python weather.py New York. So let's try it out. I'm going to put in my API key in the environment variable and give it a shot. Okay, so now I have the API key entered. And one of the things I'll do is create a Python environment for this, and we'll install the things we need. Now, if we go back to Claude Code here, it says that you can just export the key and then do Python weather.py. And I can see here that it might actually work. Weather.py New York. But it needs to be Python 3 because I'm on a Mac. And we need to import requests. So we'll go ahead and do this. Python.m env. We'll create a virtual environment. Again, Python 3. We'll activate that. And then we can do Python weather.py New York. It's going to need at least requests, right? So we'll say pip install requests. And it looks like it is unauthorized. So I'm going to make sure that I have the right API key entered. Okay, well, I have double checked and my API key is being populated and it's valid on the website. So I'm going to go back to Claude here and say, we'll say unauthorized for URL. And let's see if Claude can help. I am getting an error. And then we will submit the error. And now it's grooving. And it says, you want to check if this is set. It's going to run a bash command. It says your API key isn't set, which is actually untrue because it is set. So let's try something else. Because if we go into bash and we echo out open weather API key, it's there. So clearly that isn't the problem. And it says if you have an API key and it's still not working, the key might be invalid, or you might need to wait a few minutes. So we'll wait a few minutes. Okay, so we've waited a while here and it's just not working. So I'm going to say I have waited and it still is not working. Can you check the API call itself to make sure it is following open weather specifications? So this is one thing that you can ask Claude, and sometimes it will go out to the internet and it will examine documentation and things to kind of double check itself. And that's what it's doing right here. Claude wants to fetch this content. Yes. So it's going to fetch this content and kind of look up and see how we're supposed to access this API, because maybe it's changed since the training happened. And it says here that it wants to do some debug output. It says, I'll check the open weather API documentation to determine it's correct. It looks correct. Let me test it with the debug version to see exactly what's happening. So yes, we want to put in this additional debug information. Now try running the script again. So we will run it again. And adding the debug information, it now appears to be working properly, as it should. This is what we were trying to get earlier, is these coordinates here. Put in something different. Now we have a response. So I am not sure exactly what happened there, but it looks like it's working now. And I'm going to leave this in the video because I've been leaving all the mistakes in the video with all of these things to show a more realistic process of how this really works. So if I clip and edit this part out of here, then it makes it look like Claude Code works perfectly and looks like everything went smoothly and great. And that's not always the case. So we're going to leave this in here. Now we need to move on to the next step. So if we're able to get this information, we're even able to get this weather information, but we're going to do something a little different. Now, one thing we're going to do, so this put it into two functions, right? And that was one of the things that I was going to do to improve readability. I was going to say, hey, please put this into get coordinates and get weather as two separate ones. But Claude Code already did that for us. So it has some good structured results coming out of it. And now what we want to do is expose this as an API with Fast API. And so what that's going to do is we're going to turn this into our own API that we can share with other people. And one of the things we could do is we could convert this temperature into Fahrenheit because we're in the United States. And even though I don't necessarily agree with it, we use Fahrenheit here. So that's something that we can add in there as well. So I said, turn this into a Fast API app with one endpoint, weather, city. It should return JSON with the city name, coordinates, temperature, and conditions. I would like to display Fahrenheit for the temperature. So we're being pretty specific here, right? We're saying this is what we want to do with it. So we're able to grab this API data. Now we want to convert this into something else. We could even turn this into an MCP application if we wanted to, like we've done in our MCP course. But here we go. Now it says we need to import Fast API. We need to change. It looks like right now it's just importing the Fast API. So we'll say yes. And then we'll see. Now it's going to convert this script to a Fast API application. So if you haven't used Fast API as a Python developer, it is fantastic. So that's why I chose this. And we can see here we don't even have to do the conversion. So when I said I wanted to display it in Fahrenheit, I was thinking maybe it would do the 9x32 and do the conversion, pop it out. But it looks like we can just change our API call, which is even simpler and easier to do. So I'm going to say, yeah, let's make this edit. And now we're getting into the meat of the API application here. And it says, do you want to make these edits? So it's going to pull some of this stuff out of main, and it's going to move it around. We've got an asynchronous function here, get weather per city. And it's kind of shifting things around. All of this looks really good at a glance. And if it doesn't work perfectly the first time, we'll debug it and figure out why. But I think this is going to work. And it says here, we're going to pull out this debug information. Now, this debug information, when we added it, made it work. So we'll go ahead and pull it out of there, but that may not be a great idea. Okay. And it says here, we can convert it to Fast API. So I need to install Fast API in Unicorn. We've already exported the key. Here, we need to do Unicorn, weather app reload. So we'll just do that. Clear this, say pip install Fast API. Awesome. And we're just going to copy this. We're going to pretend we've never used Unicorn before. Copy it to see if Claude gave us the right command to run it. And here we go. Now we have Unicorn running on 127.8.0.0. So we can send this a request with a city. Let's see what it returns. Okay, now I've got my favorite API testing tool, Postman, open here, and we're just going to send a GET request to localhost 8000/weather with the city name. And you can see here, it brings back Forest Grove with coordinates, latitude and longitude, temperature 60.76 Fahrenheit, conditions overcast with clouds, which if I look outside, I can see that's pretty accurate. So this is great. So in this demo, I wanted to show how easy it is to work with APIs. Now you can't plug in an API directly into Claude Code like you can with some other generative AI tools. However, you can call APIs, use that data, make APIs, things like that. Very simple. So Claude Code is very aware of APIs and other services and how to create them. In this one, we had a little bit of a hiccup that may have been from the service that we signed up, and maybe when I generated the API key, something like that, but Claude Code was able to handle it, fix it for us, and get it going. So thank you for watching.